Okay, welcome to the West, part one. Um, as you guys know, what we did already is the natives and then the southern colonies, the northern colonies of the American Revolution, basically chronological, right, in historical order. What we're going to be doing now, the next few lectures, is different themes from the 1800s. So we'll be doing the West, we'll be doing the Jacksonian era, we'll be talking about women, slavery, and then we'll get chronological again with Reconstruction and then go through the decades. So the thesis for the West is while natives met with much tragedy, which we'll be talking about this time, the next time we'll talk about many others found opportunity and adventure in the West. So this is the outline. So we're first going to talk about how natives met the Spaniards over on the West Coast, the Californios who were ranchers also on the West Coast. Then we'll talk more about the middle of the country with Manifest Destiny and Native Americans. We'll talk about the conquering the West is kind of quick, and then the gold rush again in California. And then we'll do something that's, I think, pretty fun with the African American West. Okay, so just to give you kind of an overview and remind you of where we've been, we've already talked about the 1500s with Europe, remember, with the Black Plague and population growth, price revolution, and closure movement. Then we moved over to the 1600s. We did Virginia, and then we did the New England colonies, and then we did the American Revolution. That gets into the 1700s. Well, at the same exact time as the American Revolution, on the West Coast, we're going to be having Spain conquering and colonizing, and we're going to get the beginning of our city. For example, San Jose was the first pueblo. We'll talk about that, which is like a town that was founded in 1777. So it's exactly the same time as American Revolution. But instead of it being ruled by England like it is on the left, I mean on the right, the East Coast, on the left it's ruled by Spain. And then our town is actually 1781. So be thinking about this as, American Revolution, about, equality and everybody should have rights, and then how were the Spaniards treating the natives. Okay, so first we're going to talk about when the Spaniards came to California. How did they deal with the natives? And they dealt with them with missions, presidios, and pueblos. So mission, as you know, is like a more spiritual place. Presidios is where the soldiers would live. The soldiers would guard the pueblos and the missions and, cause some problems. But there is a presidio in San Francisco still. And then the pueblos were the regular towns, just like we said. So San Jose was the first one, 1777. Our town was first called Nuestra Señora La Reina de Los Angeles de Porciuncula, founded in 1781. You don't need to write this down, but it had 11 couples, 22 children. They were Indian and African with Spanish blood, and no one could write their name. And then what we're going to be doing is talking a little bit more about the missions again, and then we're going to talk about La Perouse and Father Jaime. That's going to be two of your first primary sources. Okay, so this is a picture of all the missions. There's 21 missions. They were done one horseback ride a day apart. If you know El Camino Real, right, that goes all the way up and down the coast, that was the road, which became like Sepulveda, right? Okay, so this, if you have a Catholic background, you might recognize this. This is called a confessionario, and it was where people go and confess their sins. So I have a document that normally I can pass around, but these are some of the questions from it. And just take a look. Have you considered that in your village, someone bringing herbs, pray words to the devil with them? Have you made some sorcerer look for something lost by the arts of the devil? To go to war, did you bathe with the juice of certain herbs? Have you advised someone else so that they could bewitch? Have you conjured a rainstorm or a thunderstorm with superstitions? So first I ask, what do you think this is? Okay, so hopefully you've got an idea. And this was the guide that the priest used when they talked to the natives. So obviously it's got a bias, right? I mean, do you think the natives thought that they were praying to the devil? Or maybe they thought they were conjuring, but do you think they thought they were bewitching? I don't know if they would use those words, but the priests would think these were sins, right? So, why do we use this in the first place if it's got so much bias? Well, do we have any videos of how the natives lived? No. This is a lot of ways the best way we know how they lived. We know that they might have brought herbs. They might have bathed with the juice of certain herbs with going to war. They might have done like a conjuring of a rainstorm or a thunderstorm. So this is how we learn about the natives, but we need to remember that it is through a bias. Okay, so now we're going to talk about La Perouse and Father Jaime. And La Perouse was a French explorer. He was one of the only probably non-Spanish that came, maybe the only one that came to the missions. And the way that I like to describe what we're going to be reading about La Perouse is, imagine you go to a friend's house and you find out that they are abusing their kids. You suspect it. Well, La Perouse, it's the same thing. You know, he saw how the natives were being treated. He just came from France, where they're talking all about equality. They're about to have their French Revolution. He seems to sort of think a little less of the natives than as, you know, equal human beings, but almost as children. But it seems like he really is not 100% okay with how the Spaniards are treating the natives. So again, you know, with that situation, you know, would you report your friend? Would you ignore it and, you know, have a hard time living with yourself? So that's the situation La Perouse is in. He sees what's going on. He's trying to report it, but he's also, you know, he's a guest, so it's kind of a hard situation. Okay, so I'm going to go over a couple of the paragraphs. You can choose one of these out of the other ones in the documents, but I need to give you kind of some background. So take a look at this, and we're going to kind of skim it. So the moment an Indian is baptized, it's the same as if he had pronounced a vow for life. If he escapes to reside with his relations in independent villages, he's summoned 3 times. Then the missionaries apply to the governor, who sends soldiers, where he's condemned to receive a certain number of lashes with a whip. So, you know, you don't go to church one day. Do they come get you and whip you? You know, no. So one thing I really need to make clear is that the natives were not forced to convert. They made this choice that they came. They wanted to maybe get some red beads, or their family was in the mission. They probably didn't know what they were getting themselves into. So the priest might say to them, do you want to accept Jesus as your savior? And they might say, you know, hey, I've got a river god, a sun god, you know, well, let me add Jesus in there. But once they were baptized, they could not leave. And that is where the difference is. You know, Europeans, you know, white people, whatever, they could leave, but the natives had to stay. And if they escaped, then they were brought back forcibly. But again, they weren't forced to convert, but once they were there, that was the deal. Okay, here's another one that I want to point out, is women are never whipped in public, but in an enclosed and somewhat distant place, that their cries may not excite a too lively compassion, which might cause the men to revolt. So the men, the latter, on the contrary, exposed to the view of all their fellow citizens, that their punishments may serve as an example. So the women are hidden so that the men don't revolt. The men, when they're whipped, are put in front of everybody, so it's an example. They usually ask pardon. They say sorry for their fault, in which case the executioner diminishes the force of his lashes, but the number is always irrevocable. So if they say they're sorry, which they say they usually do, the executioner will whip them, and he doesn't kill them. He's not allowed to kill them unless they get special permission, just to let you know. But the whipper is going to whip them more softly, but he keeps the same numbers. So again, how are they treating these people? You know, if we sin, we don't get whipped, right? So they're kind of treating them, I don't say like animals, because I really think that's too far of a term, and it kind of diminishes the meaning. I would say maybe like children, or a little bit less than human. Animals, it's the animals are not saying they're sorry, so it's just a little different. I don't know. I mean, if you want to argue it, you just need to argue it. Don't throw the word animal though around, please. Okay, so women are segregated here. They're put in these different houses. Okay, now what I wanted to point out with this is that I use Father Louis Jaime because not all the priests were like evil. Okay, this priest is fighting for the rights of these women. These women are being raped by the soldiers. The soldiers are not good guys. And this priest was standing up for them. Just like we know the name Father, you know, Huna Paracera, there were a lot of good priests. You know, some people that maybe were led astray a little bit, but, and not such nice guys, but that's why I include this one. And just another point, I used to use an article where this one priest said, and it was a modern priest, he said, it's fine that we whip the natives because we whip ourselves. So, you know, there's obviously a problem with that argument, right? I mean, if you whip yourself, because Catholic priests might do that as like a form of penance, I mean, you're making that choice as opposed to a native is not making that choice. Okay, so what you're going to do is you're going to do 3 paragraphs for La Perouse, go to the readings. and one paragraph, one question for one paragraph for Father Jaime. So please try to use other ones than I did. Definitely, what are you getting from this? I know I have different segments to letter A, B, C, but anyways, it's worth 15 points, the whole deal, 6 questions, 15 points. So it does work out. Okay, now we're going to talk about the Californios. And the Californios, what happened is when Mexico became in charge of this area instead of Spain, and that was in 1821, and you don't need to write that down. But by 1834, the Mexican government took land from the missions and gave it to these settlers. And these guys were called Californios. So these people, you could get as much as 50,000 acres. So that's acres like a block. So imagine 50,000 blocks, like all of Palos Verdes. And all you had to do is be a Mexican of good character, or you could be a foreigner willing to become naturalized and accept the Catholic faith. And by 1830, there were about 50 private residences. Now, what happened is when you're in California, they were pretty easygoing about stuff, and they would say, oh, my border is más o menos, more or less here by that rock or that tree or that river or whatever. So when we became a state in 1850, it was really hard for them to prove their land. Plus, the state was more geared towards favoring the gold rush people. So a lot of the ranchers, they did lose a lot. But you recognize the name Dominguez, Sepulveda, Carson, Del Amo. Those are all from Californias. And what I normally do with this class is have you, for extra credit, go to a ranch. But unfortunately, we can't do that. But I really recommend doing that on your own, going to Dominguez Ranch or Los Cerritos or Los Alamitos or the Centinela House in Inglewood. It's really, really incredible. Okay, so with the Californias, they were super, super patriarchal. And there's a story I normally tell where this guy named Alfred Robinson, who's obviously not Hispanic, right? He is 27 and he's courting this young girl who's 13. And when I say young, I mean young. There's another story where this woman was having trouble giving birth, and this military officer helped her, and they said, what can we do to repay you? And he said, when this baby becomes a woman, basically has her period at 14, I want to marry him. He was 40. So that whole old guy, younger girl, very common during this time. You can see a group of people here. Okay. Now, what I want you to do is to go to Guadalupe Vallejo, and people are squatting on their land, white people, and, how did they deal with that? So that's document 3. Okay, now we're going to go to the Midwest. The manifest destiny, as I'm sure you're very familiar with, is this belief that God has destined basically the white people to take over the whole country. This is a really famous picture. So you can see the pioneers in front of her, and then kind of more established technology with trains and covered wagons and stagecoaches. And she's carrying a telegraph with her. So supposedly bringing progress with her. Okay, so we're going to do some kind of fun things to get you in the mood, or just, go over some stuff together. You don't have to write any of this down, but just say true or false, right? So the U.S. was never able to fulfill its dream of westward expansion because of the ever-present Indian problem. So is that true or false? So that is false. The U.S. government avoided at all costs any confrontations with the Indians. Okay, that is false. Indians were placed on reservations that the Indians' more desirable lands could be opened up to settlement. True. The reservation system worked to solve the Indian problem for all time. False. The Indian, once given the right opportunity, easily fit into the white man's world. False. The U.S. government was very generous to Indians on the reservations, protecting them from numerous abuses. What do you think? False. It was not easy, but Indians were usually able to preserve their culture and civilization on the reservations. True, false, right? The government strictly upheld its promises and treaties made with the Indians. Absolutely false. Most Indians became Christians and readily accepted the white man's way of life. More false, but some true. The government's dealings with the Indians was a system of give and take, mostly take. Yes, true. The Indian offered no resistance to the white man since their plight was inevitable. False. Okay, so we're going to do just a little bit of background history. So with the American Revolution, a lot of natives fought on the British side because the British promised them that they would be able to maintain their land. But as you know, the British lost, right? So what they ended up doing with the Treaty of Paris is taking land from the natives without even consulting them. Now, George Washington had some pretty interesting views. He did believe in buying land from the Indians, which again was very rare. Remember Roger Williams? That was very rare. He believed that natives were equal, and which is interesting, but then he thought their society was inferior, so he felt that they could be civilized. Okay, so now we're going to talk about Tecumseh resistance in the War of 1812, just briefly. So that's going to be one of your primary sources is Tecumseh. Okay, before we do that, let's take a look at ways we deal with the natives. Again, you don't have to write this down, but you'll recognize this pattern. So the U.S. sends soldiers to maintain peace and keep out settlers. White settlers sneak on Indian lands anyway. Tribes object, sometimes violently. Soldiers intervene, usually on the side of settlers. The U.S. forces a treaty wherein the tribes give up land for aid, which was not always delivered. The tribes either A, recognize the inevitable and sign, or B, fight back and lose. The tribes move west into other lands, often having to fight tribes already living there for space, and then repeat the process. Okay, so here's three primary sources. The first one is Tecumseh, and Tecumseh and his brother Tenskwatawa both were just really tired of the natives selling out to the whites and literally selling their land to the whites. So they're going to have a problem with that, and take a look at that. Obviously read the source and tell me from the source. Red Jacket is going to be arguing against white men's Christianity. Obviously don't just put that. Tell me what some of his arguments are. Thomas Jefferson, our third president, really thought he had some advice, and of course who wants unwanted advice, right? But he wanted to point out some things about private land ownership and farming. He thought he knew the way. Please remember that natives taught us originally how to farm in this land. The Puritans were starving, right? Pilgrims were starving, and the natives taught them how to plant with the fish and stuff. So please keep that in mind. Okay, so now we're going to do something pretty interesting. It's Tecumseh's curse, and you can print out this handout if you want, or just kind of follow along. This should not be here, but anyways, so Tecumseh, I won't read this, but they got in this big fight with Harrison, who's going to become our president. But when Harrison was just a general, actually here it says a governor. So when Harrison becomes president in 1840, there's a play. It's not even real, but there's a play that Tecumseh curses Harrison and says that any president that is elected in a year ending in 0 will die. So in 1840, we have Harrison, and he dies of pneumonia after serving 31 days in office. This is all true. So that was the shortest amount of time. The real Harrison really died. 1860, who was president? Abraham Lincoln. How did he die? Assassinated. 1880 was Garfield, and he also was shot. He died several months later. McKinley in 1900 was also shot, and that's when Teddy Roosevelt became president. 1920, we have Harding, so it's no longer shot. It said he died of a stroke, but he did die while he was in office. 1940 is going to be Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and in his third term, he died of a cerebral hemorrhage. 1960, I think you would know that one, is JFK. He was assassinated. 1980, Reagan was actually shot but did not die. So does this end the curse? My understanding is that he had a whole prayer group that fought it, prayed against his curse. So whatever you think about that. His wife started getting into kind of some horoscope stuff and astrology stuff that really, really freaked her out. And also in 2000, part of the 9/11 plan was to kill the president, but it failed. So I know you're looking 2020, what's going to happen? Pretty interesting. I don't know. I don't want to say anything. So anyways, again, this is the thesis. While natives met with much tragedy, many others found opportunity and invention in the West. We'll be doing the second part in a little bit. And thank you so much.